Here with me today to discuss this story is law enforcement professional and active shooter expert Chris Grolnick. Chris, great to have you back.
Hey Liz, thanks for having me back again.
On Monday, we talked about active shooting and what the best course of action to take is in those situations. So let's talk about active stabbing today. How is this different situationally? How should people react in situations like the one that occurred at UC Merced?
You know, it's strange that we talked about it probably 2 days before that the incident at Merced happened. And we even mentioned that, you know, to be an active shooter event or an active aggression event, which we typically refer to as a critical incident, it doesn't have to have a knife or a gun. We talked about the car at Oklahoma, and then lo and behold, the stabbing happens the next day, and it's not getting the same attention that everything else does. In that, even and in my opinion, even if it were a gun in Merced, because this looks like it's going to be a homegrown domestic terrorist attack. The guy's manifesto came out. I've got inside knowledge of what it said. It does, you know, he was screaming phrases like Ali Akbar. He was mentioning the Prophet Muhammad. There's a lot more to the manifesto that's coming out, what the news media is privy to. And it's not that I have more information than the news media. I've called some friends on the ground and talked to them about it. Now, this person not only stabbed 4 people and then was shot and killed himself. In realistic terms, it would be much better to have him in custody to debrief him and find out what happened. But what a brave construction worker that interrupted him, right? He did exactly what we preach. Not necessarily attack as a last resort, but, you know, deter the person committing these heinous acts and stop them from occurring, because what he did was he distracted them. That's exactly what we just talked about on Monday.
Right. You talked about how the best thing to do in those situations is to distract from the attack in order for yourself and others to get away safely. And I think that kind of advice is very valuable. I do want to talk about the insider information that you have. You say you don't necessarily have information the news doesn't have. You're just on the ground involved in the response to these sort of incidents. Is there indication that this individual was inspired by ISIS?
So there's a lot of different information floating around out there, and part of the inside track would be it was inspired by ISIS, but it wasn't directed by, if you will. So it was kind of, you know, the kid watched some wacky videos and decided, you know, he was going to make a really cool plan in his mind. Because remember, these people, although maybe a little demented, they're very intelligent because they study the behavior and the successes, and no one of these people that are involved in any of these incidents have ever been, if you will, ready to fail. Their biggest fear is failure. So, you know, I don't know that it's fair to say that it was ISIS inspired, other than in his twisted mind that he watched ISIS videos and said, oh, I'm going to do something like Garland. And I just don't think the news media, the mainstream media, I don't think the publishing media, written media, or even syndicated radio hosts are prepared to talk about another homegrown terrorist attack, because what aren't we talking about directly, like other countries are? The airline bombing. I mean, we know at this point that it was a bomb that went off in that airplane. We know it was a terrorist attack. We know Russians died. We know they suspended flights, but we don't want to talk about what's going on here because there's just too much at stake.
Right. Our media is very hesitant to talk about Islamic terrorism because they're almost afraid to use that word. Now, would you say, if you wouldn't go as far to categorize it as inspired by ISIS, is it encouraged by ISIS? Because I know they have very concerted efforts online, on message boards, on videos, on social media, to recruit these very same type of homegrown terrorists. They want to inspire people to take up arms against the country that they live in if they consider the country to be evil, as they do with the United States. Is that a fair assumption to make at this point?
Absolutely, Liz. And I mean, I'll share with you something I've never shared on any network. So the main difference between an active shooter event, or what we call a critical incident, because this is like an active shooter event, it's just with a blade. And I hate to say that because I'm not trying to besmirch the victims by any means. But the only difference between an active shooter event and a terrorism attack is terrorist attacks are motivated by religious, ideological, and political goals and objectives. Now, that's what this kid was motivated by. He found a video. He found some type of objective. He was motivated, and he went out and carried it out. An active shooter event is more in tune with, you know, they want to get even with people. Now, this one kind of crosses both lines, because in his manifesto, he specifically picked out other freshmen that had kicked him out of clubs And then he said, okay, well, I'll show you. I'll go find new friends. And that's kind of where the terror side came in to play, if you will. Now, I'm not saying that's not a reason that we shouldn't discuss both ends, and they overlap, because something I have said on the news before is these things do overlap. There is an active shooter event that can become a domestic terrorist event or a global terrorist event, and global terrorists, use active shooters as one of their main methods. Look at the Kenya mall shooting and bombing. They used AK-47s for hours, shooting at will, Mumbai attacks. I can probably name 30 right now off the top of my head.
Great.